Magic and Mystery in Tibet by Alexandra David-Neel. Psychic Sports. The Art of Warming Oneself Without Fire in the Snows. To spend the winter in a cave amidst the snows at an altitude that varies between 11,000 and 18,000 feet, clad in a thin garment or even naked and escape freezing, is a somewhat difficult achievement. Yet, numbers of Tibetan hermits go safely each year through this ordeal. Their endurance is ascribed to the power which they have acquired to generate Tumo. The word Tumo signifies heat, warmth, but it is not used in Tibetan language to express ordinary heat or warmth. It is the technical term of mystic terminology, and the effects of that mysterious heat are not confined to warming the anchorites who can produce it. Tibetan adepts of the secret lore distinguish various kinds of Tumo. Exoteric Tumo, which arises spontaneously in the course of peculiar raptures, and gradually folds the mystic in the soft, warm mantle of the gods. Esoteric Tumo, that keeps the hermits comfortable on the snowy hills. Mystic Tumo, which can only claim a distant and quite figurative connection with the term warmth, for it is the experience of a paradisic bliss in this world. In the secret teaching, Tumo is also the subtle fire which warms the generative fluid and drives the energy in it, till it runs all over the body through the tidal channels of the Tsas, T-S-A-S. And there's a footnote here that says, Tsas, which means at once vein, artery, and nerve. Superstition and odd physiological ideas have contributed to give birth to many extraordinary stories on this subject, one of which I will venture to briefly relate. The famous ascetic Reshungpa, R-E-S-C-H-U-N-G-P-A, anxious to become an erudite, left his master Milarespa against the latter's advice to study the philosophic literature at Lhasa. Lacking his spiritual father's blessing, things turned out badly for him, at least from a religious point of view. A rich man became quite enthusiastic about the young lama's learning and mastery of occult lore, and in order to attach him to his house, he gave him his only child as wife. This happened before the reform of Tsongkhapa, Tsongkhapa, at a time when all lamas were allowed to marry. The girl did not in the least share her father's admiration for Rishchumba, but she was obliged to obey him, and in revenge made life rather hard for her poor husband, who might well regret having yielded to the attraction of wealth. His meekness in bearing ill treatment did not soften his wife's heart. She went so far as to stab him with a knife, and lo, instead of blood, generative fluid ran out of the wound. By the practice of Tumo, so said the Lama who told me the story about absolute conviction. Now, let me read that sentence again. Okay. By the practice of Tumo, so said the Lama who told me the story with absolute conviction, the body of Reshungpa had been filled with the seed of life. To do justice to Tibetans, I must add that another Lama scoffed at the tale and thus explained it. Truly, through Tumo practices, one may fill one's body with generative force which allows psychic creations. But this is subtle, invisible energy. and not gross material substance. However, only a few, even in mystic circles, are thoroughly acquainted with these kinds of Tumo, while the wonderful effects of the Tumo that warms and keeps alive the hermits in the snowy wilds are known to every Tibetan. It does not follow that the process by which this mysterious heat is produced is equally familiar to all of them. On the contrary, it is kept secret by the lamas who teach it, and they do not fail to declare that information gathered by hearsay or by reading is without practical result if one has not been personally taught and trained by a master who is himself an adept. Moreover, only those who are qualified to undertake the training may hope to enjoy its fruit. The most important qualifications required are to be already skilled in various practices connected with breathing, to be capable of a perfect concentration of mind, going as far as the trance in which the thoughts become visualized, and to have received the proper ankur, A-N-G-K-U-R, from a lama possessed with the power of conferring it. Tumo initiation is preceded by a long period of probation. Among other objects, I think probation aims at testing the robustness of the candidates. As great as may be my confidence in the Tumo method, I still doubt whether it could be safely practiced by people of weak constitution. It is probable, however, that Tumo's teachers wisely endeavored to avoid failures that might prove harmful to presumptive disciples and lower their own repute. I do not know whether, when yielding to my pressing requests and shortening my time of probation, the Venerable Lama who empowered me only wanted to get rid of me or not. He simply told me to go to a lonely spot, to bathe there in an icy mountain stream, and then, without drying my body or putting on my clothes, to spend the night motionless in meditation. Winter had not yet begun, but the level of the place, about 10,000 feet high, made the night rather chilly, and I felt very proud of not catching cold. Later on, I took another bath of the same kind, this time involuntarily, when I lost footing as I was fording the Mikok River near Rakishi in northern Tibet. When I reached the shore in a few minutes, my clothes froze on me. I had no spare ones. One may easily understand that Tibetans, who are frequently exposed to accidents caused by a hard climate, hold a method that protects them against the cold in high esteem. Once initiated, one must renounce all fur or woolen clothing and never approach the fire to warm oneself. After a long period during which he exerted himself under the close supervision of his master, the novice must retire to a very remote, absolutely solitary place situated high up on the hills. In Tibet, high up means generally an altitude well above 10,000 feet. According to Tumo teachers and adepts, one must never practice the training exercises inside a house or near inhabited places. They believe that foul air produced by the smoke and smells, together with the various occult causes, impede the success of the student and may even harm him. Once conveniently settled, the disciple must see nobody besides his lama, who may visit him occasionally or to whose hermitage he may repair at long intervals. The novice must begin his training each day before dawn and finish the special exercise relating to Tumo before sunrise, because as a rule he has to perform one or another meditation at that time. The practice must be done in the open, and one must be either naked or clothed in a single cotton garment. Beginners may sit on a straw mat if they own one, or on a piece of hard sackcloth, or a wooden stool. More advanced disciples sit on the bare ground, and at a still higher degree of proficiency, on the snow or the ice of a frozen pond or stream. They must not breakfast or even drink anything, especially any hot drink, before practicing. 2 postures are allowed, either the usual meditation posture cross-legged or seated in the Western fashion, each hand placed on the corresponding knee, the thumb and forefinger and the little finger being extended, and the middle and fourth finger bent under the palm. Various breathing drills are first performed, which aim at clearing the passage of the air in the nostrils. Then, pride, anger, hatred, covetousness, sloth, stupidity are mentally rejected with the rhythmic breathing out. All blessings from saintly beings, the Buddhist spirit, the 5 wisdoms, all that is good and lofty in the world, are attracted and assimilated while drawing in the breath. Now, composing oneself for a while, one dismisses all cares and cogitations. Having become perfectly calm, one imagines that a golden lotus exists in one's body on a level with the navel. In this lotus, shining like the sun, stands the syllable Ram, R-A-M. Above Ram is the syllable Ma, M-A. From Ma, Dorji Naljorma, a feminine deity, issues. These mystic syllables, which are called seed, must not be regarded as mere written characters or symbolic representations of things, but as living beings standing erect and endowed with motive power. For instance, Ram is not the mystic name excuse me. For instance, Ram is not the mystic name of the fire, it is the seed of the fire. Hindus attach great importance to the right pronunciation of these seed formulas. They think that their power resides in the sound, which they believe to be creative. Certain Tibetan mystics agree that Ram, correctly pronounced, may produce fire, yet these mystic symbols are not generally used in Tibet as sound, but rather as representations of elements, deities, etc. Tibetans identifying Ram with the fire think that he who knows how to make mental use of the subjective image of that word can set anything ablaze or even produce flames without apparent fuel. As soon as one has imagined Dorji Naljorma springing from what the syllable Ma, one must identify oneself with her. When one has become the deity, one imagines the letter A placed in the navel, this is a capital A, placed in the navel, and the letter Ha, H-A, at the top of one's head. Now Ha, there's a footnote here, and it says Ha, a letter of the Tibetan alphabet. Slow, deep inspirations act as bellows and wake up a smoldering fire the size and the shape of a minute ball. There's a footnote here that says, Tibetan literal similitude is the size and shape of a goat dung. This fire exists in A. Each inspiration produces the sensation of a breath of wind penetrating the abdomen at the height of the navel and increasing the force of the flames. Then each deep inspiration is followed by a retention of the breath. Gradually, the time spent holding in the breath is increased more and more. One's thoughts continue to follow the waking up of fire, which ascends along the Uma, U-M-A, vein arising in the middle of the body. To Tibetans have borrowed from India the three mystic nadi, in brackets, arteries, veins, which play an important part in the various yoga psychic trainings. In Tibetan, nadis, N-A-D-I-S, are called sas, T-S-A-S, and respectively named Rama, Kyangma, and Uma. These so-called arteries are not supposed to be true arteries containing blood, but exceedingly thin nerves that distribute currents of psychic energy. The three tsas, just mentioned, are the most important, but there exist countless others. However, enlightened mystics consider the tsa system as devoid of any physical reality. According to their opinion, it is but symbolical imagery. The exercises go on through 10 stages, but one must understand that there exists no pause between them. The different subjective visions, as well as the sensations which accompany them, succeed each other in a series of gradual modifications. Inhalations, retentions of the breath, and expirations continue rhythmically, and a mystic formula is continually repeated. The mind must remain perfectly concentrated and one-pointed on the vision of the fire and the sensation of warmth which ensues. The 10 stages may be briefly described as follows. Number 1. The central artery, Uma, is imagined and subjectively seen as thin as the thinnest thread or as a hair, yet filled with the ascending flame and crossed by the current of air produced by the breath. Number 2. The artery has increased in size and become as large as a little finger. Number 3. It continues to increase and appears the size of an arm. Number 4. The artery fills the whole body, or rather the body has become the tsa itself, a kind of tube filled with blazing fire and air. Number 5. The bodily form ceases to be perceived. Enlarged beyond measure, the artery engulfs the whole world. And the Naljorpa feels himself to be a storm-beaten flame among the glowing waves of an ocean of fire. Beginners whose mind has not yet acquired the habit of very protracted meditation go more quickly through these 5 stages, and more advanced disciples who progress slowly from one to another sunk in deep contemplation. Yet even the quickest ones take about an hour to reach the 5th stage. Now, the subjective visions repeat themselves in reverse order. Number 6. The stormy wind abates. The fiery waves sink lower and are less agitated. The blazing ocean narrows and is absorbed in the body. Number 7. The artery, which is reduced to the size of an arm, is seen again and the fire enclosed in it. 8. The artery decreases to the size of a little finger. Number 9. It becomes as thin as a hair. Number 10. It entirely disappears. The fire ceases utterly to be perceived, as well as all forms, all representations whatsoever. All ideas of any kinds of objects vanish likewise. The mind sinks into the great emptiness, where the duality of the knower and the object perceived does not exist any longer. It is a trance which, according to the spiritual and psychic development of the Naljorpa, is more or less deep and more or less prolonged. The exercise, either with or without the fire... I'm going to start that sentence again. The exercise, either with or without the 5 last stages, may be repeated during the day or whenever one is suffering from cold, but the training, properly speaking, is done during the early practice before dawn. It is probable that Milarepa resorted to it when he happened to be unexpectedly surrounded by snow in a cave of the Lachikang, Lachikang, near Mount Everest, and found himself compelled to stay there till the next spring. He made his adventure the subject of a poem, part of which is freely translated below. And I'm going to read the poem now. Disgusted with the worldly life, I sought solitude on the slopes of Lachikang. Heavens and earth, having held a council, sent me the tempest as their messenger, the airy and watery elements associated with the southern dark clouds. They imprisoned the sun and the moon, blew the small stars away from the sky, and shrouded the large ones in the mist. Then it snowed continually for 9 days and nights. The biggest flakes were as big as the fleece of wool. They came down flying like birds. The small ones were the size of peas and mustard seeds. They came down rolling and whirling. The greatness of the snowfall was beyond all expression. High up it covered the crest of the glacier ranges. Low down, buried to their tops, the trees of the forest. The black hills appeared to be whitewashed. The frost flattened the billowy lakes, and the blue running streams were hidden under the ice. The mountains and the valleys were leveled and looked like a plain. Men were prisoners in their villages. Domestic animals suffered from famine. Birds and wild beasts fasted. Mice and rats were sealed underground like a treasure during that time of calamity. The snow, the wintry blast, and my thin cotton garment fought against each other on the white mountain. The snow, as it fell on me, melted into a stream. The roaring blast was broken against the thin cotton robe which enclosed fiery warmth. The life and death struggle of the fighter could there be seen, and I, having won the victory, left a landmark for the hermits, demonstrating the great virtue of Tumo. Milarepa describes his impressions as a poet, but accepting the fact that he was shut up unexpectedly in the snows without sufficient provisions and a proper shelter, there is nothing exceptional in his experience. Many Tibetan hermits spend the winter in surroundings resembling those that he depicts. I am not so presumptuous as to compare my wintry villeggiatures on the Tibetan hills with the exertions of anchorites of Milarepa ilk, yet scenery like that of which he tells is familiar to me. I too have lived in caves and huts on high altitudes. Though I did not lack provisions and had fuel enough to light a fire whenever I wished it, I yet know the hardships of that life. But I also remember the perfect silence, the delightful aloofness, and the wonderful peace in which my hermitage was bathed, and I do not think that those who spend their days in such wise need to be pitied. I would rather say that they are to be envied. Beside the exercises which I have outlined, there exist a few others aiming at producing Tumo. However, they are all more or less alike. The process always combines prolonged retention of the breath and visualization of fire. This, in fact, amounts to autosuggestion. One of the 6 occult doctrines taught by Narota is said to have included Tumo. Here is an abridged account of Narota's method. One must bear in mind that it has already been stated such exercises were devised for the use of disciples who had already thoroughly drilled themselves for years in preparatory breathing and other gymnastics. The posture of the body is described as follows: squatting with the legs crossed, the hands passing under the thighs and then clasped together. In that posture, one must 1. Turn the stomach from right to left thrice, and from left to right thrice. 2. Churn the stomach as hard as possible. 3. Shake the body in the way a restive horse shakes itself. And perform a short leap while keeping the legs in the same crossed position. These 3 exercises must be repeated thrice successively and concluded with a leap, jumping as high as possible. It does not seem to me very wonderful that a man should feel warm without... It does not seem to me very wonderful that a man should feel warm after performing this feat. The exercise is borrowed from the Indian Hatha Yoga practices, but in Hatha Yoga treatises, it is not connected with the kind of Tumo known to Tibetans. The process continues by holding in the breath until the abdomen becomes the shape of a pot. Next comes the visualization of Dorji Naljarma as the exercise previously described. Then a sun is imagined in the palm of each hand, on the sole of each foot, and below the navel. By rubbing together the suns placed in the hands and in the feet, fire flares up and strikes the sun below the navel, which flares up in its turn and fills the whole body with fire. With each expiration of the breath, the world is visualized as being filled with fire. The exercise ends by 21 big leaps. Though there are certain resemblances in the images visualized in these 2 methods, the difference between them is nevertheless considerable, for while the second includes leaps and gesticulations, the former requires complete immobility. It is not impossible that here, as in many other cases, certain elements of the training have been borrowed from the autochthonos, bonpos, occultists. One of the latter told me that it is the visualization of the fire, rather than the motion of the breath, which produces warmth during the trance. As I did not agree, he added, a man may be killed by suggestion. He may kill himself by autosuggestion. If death can be produced in that way, so much more easily may heat be generated. Inhalations, retentions, and expirations of the breath are accomplished mechanically in the prescribed order by those who are already well trained in the Tumo practice. They do not break the concentration of the mind on the mirage of the fire, nor the repetition of the mystic formula which must accompany the contemplation. These advanced students do not need to make any effort of imagination to see the growing intensity of the fire. In their case, the process goes on by itself as a result of habit which they have acquired, and a pleasant feeling of warmth spreads gradually all over the body, which is the aim of the practice. Sometimes a kind of examination concludes the training of the Tumo students. Upon a frosty wintry night, those who think themselves capable of victoriously enduring the test are led to the shore of the river or a lake. If all the streams are frozen in the region, a hole is made in the ice. A moonlight night with a hard wind blowing is chosen. Such nights are not rare in Tibet during the winter months. The neophytes sit on the ground cross-legged and naked. Sheets are dripped in the icy water. Each man wraps himself in one of them and must dry it on his body. As soon as the sheet becomes dry, it is again dipped in the water, placed on the novice's body to be dried as before. The operation goes on in that way until daybreak. Then he who has dried the largest number of sheets is acknowledged the winner of the competition. It is said that some dry as many as 40 sheets in one night. One should perhaps make allowances for exaggeration, or perhaps the size of the sheets, which in some cases become so small as to be almost symbolical. Yet I have seen these respas dry a number of pieces of cloth the size of a large shawl. According to the old rule, one must have dried at least 3 sheets to be a true respa, entitled to wear the white cotton shirt, insignia of proficiency in Tumo, but I doubt if the rule is strictly observed nowadays. Respa, R-E-S-P-A, means one who wears but a single cotton garment in all seasons and at any height. Yet respas who slip warm clothes on under their cotton robes are not lacking in Tibet. They are either complete frauds or monks who have really gone through Tumo training but have not pursued it long enough to obtain its full benefits. Nevertheless, though there are frauds and mediocrities, some Tumo adepts go beyond the respa and, rejecting even their cotton garment, live entirely naked in the recesses of the high mountain ranges for long periods, and sometimes it is said even for life. Tibetans feel rather proud of such feats and do not fail to scoff at the naked Indian yogins, whom they meet when going on a pilgrimage to India. They do not understand that with Indians, nakedness is the symbol of absolute renunciation and not a display of extraordinary physical endurance. One of these super respas, who had trained himself in Tumo near Kangtis, Kangtise, while journeying over the plains of India with another respa and lay servant from Nepal to Gaya, Gaya, happened to see a pretentious-looking sadhu lying naked and sunbaked on a mat. "Old chap, you should go naked like that and lie on Tumofang's shore. Then you will surely pull another face," said the Tibetan anchorite mockingly to the Indian, who of course did not understand his language, nor why the 3 travelers irreverently burst out laughing at him. This was related to me by the hermit himself, who, in his old age, still enjoyed this little joke of his younger days. In fact, when one begins the training, the phenomenon of increasing heat, or perhaps in some cases the subjective sensation of warmth, only lasts while practicing the exercise. When the concentration of mind and the breathing gymnastics cease, cold is again gradually felt. On the contrary, it is said that with those students who have persevered in the training practice for many years, the production of heat becomes a natural function of the organism, which works all by itself as soon as the weather grows cold. Beside drying wet sheets on one's body, there exist various other tests to ascertain the degree of heat which the neophyte is able to radiate. One of these tests consists in sitting in the snow. The quantity of snow melted under the man and the distance at which it melts around him are taken as measures of his ability. It's difficult for us to get a perfectly correct idea of the extent of the results obtained through Tumo training, but some of these feats are genuine. Hermits really do live naked or wearing one single thin garment during the whole winter in the high regions I have mentioned. I am not the only one who has seen some of them. It has been said that some members of the Mount Everest expedition had an occasional glimpse of one of these naked anchorites. In conclusion, I may say that I have myself obtained remarkable results from my small experience of Tumo.